Hey there. I got a question for you. Do you care about the environment? I'm sure you do. Maybe you recycle. Maybe you compost. It's pretty easy to do those things in this city. Maybe you buy from a local grocery store. You know, make sure your food comes from around the area. That's good. Those things are good. But is there a limit to what an individual can do in their consumer choices towards the environment? This is one of the main questions that are behind the interview you're about to watch. You're about to watch an interview or listen to an interview between myself and two Montreal authors, Aaron Van Singen and Vijay Kulanjavadi. They just released a book last year called The Sustainability Class. And the book talks about these kinds of people who are maybe, the term they love to use is the $25 smoothie drinkers, the people who go to uh, upscale grocery stores where everything is organic and fair trade. And the three of us, we joke about these things. We talk about, sometimes being part of that kind of lifestyle. But that's sort of the issue, is when environmentalism is only a lifestyle. Um, VJ and Aaron see a limitation to politics, to really transformative environmental justice when we're talking about lifestyle environmentalism. In their book, they lay out a few different archetypes of this sustainability class. They're still reifying these capitalist things. They're still producing gentrification, and underneath it all, it's property. But I'll let you listen to the full interview to see what I'm talking about. Enjoy. Hello there, hello there. It's Calden That's Book coming at you with another interview. This time I'm joined by Aaron Van Sijen and Vijay Kunjavadi. How are you two doing?
Great.
Great.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I brought these two on, these two Montreal-based authors, researchers. They're here to talk about a book of theirs that came out called The Sustainability Class, The Rise of Lifestyle Environmentalism. That's what they talk about in the book. I think there's lots of interesting things happening in this book. It's kind of, I guess, well-to-do upper class kind of people who take environmentalism, global warming, climate change to be their cause, and they try to, I guess, in their own way, best fight it. But perhaps the question of the book is: are they really helping? Is a big sustainable yacht really the answer to the climate crisis? Yeah. Could you two tell me a little bit about the book and how it came to be?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you, Colden, for having us today. Yeah, the book I think came out of sort of frustrations around what we were seeing happening in Montreal, actually, specifically around just this sort of green aesthetic vibe that was spreading, that was related and very linked to like real estate,
Mm.
linked as well to gentrification. We were seeing the links being made between ecology and environmentalism and the evictions of people, in particularly around Park X with the expansion and the creation of the new campus mill in around 2020, 2019, 2020. At that time, it was that the campus was really sort of branded as being, it had all the works, rainwater harvesting, ports for electric vehicles, tree planting around the campus. Just promises to be like this sort of, it was like a LEED certified building, promises to kind of be this like exemplar of ecological architecture. Meanwhile, it was also yeah, bringing in students from other parts of the city and the world, and obviously with them a lot of capital, looking to move into neighborhoods to adjacent neighborhood, particularly Park X, which is one
Mm.
of the most densely populated neighborhoods in Canada, actually, and also a very lower income. And so the combination of all this just seemed really, really outrageous. And just the ways by which, the sort of boutique started to emerge on Beaumont that, reflected the kind of expansion of Mile End lifestyles sort of spreading into the sort of real estate creation of Mile X and then potentially into Park X. And the fact that it was being framed around environmentalism and sustainability just seemed so egregious.
Mm.
And it seemed like this is not like if we're going to be talking about environmental or ecological transitioning, this is not how it is. This is not the way that it should be done because it is actually the opposite of what needs to be transformed. And so I think that was the origin of wanting to write something because we're both either living or we're living in Park X or we're really deeply sort of involved in the community, organizing in the community. And so it just was like it was really, really harsh to see this actually happening and how yeah, just a sort of ecology element around it.
Right, right. You have this big shiny new campus. They're using all the kind of I guess the right attitudes about it, right? They have this rainwater collection, it's all green and stuff like that. But then it's kind of seems to be masking something sort of sinister and familiar, I guess, which is just gentrification.
Hmm.
Oh, yeah. Aaron, I spoke to you a little bit because I remember I was asking I was so curious about I guess the local kind of trends that we see kind of feeding this development. But you told me the hotbed of it is really in LA. Could you talk a bit about what that hotbed looks like there?
Yeah, so VJ had this idea, wrote an article about this. Said it in Montreal, and then he was approached by someone saying, you need to write a book about this, and he asked me if he wanted to join in, and then we were told basically like, forget Montreal, go to LA. That's where you're gonna
Mm.
find this. So we went to Venice Beach, which is a famous neighborhood in Los Angeles. You have Santa Monica, Venice Beach; they're right next to each other, and um, you kind of have to see it to believe it. You're going down the street, Abbot Kinney Boulevard, and every other store is like sustainable this, regenerative that. We for every piece of $500 clothing you buy, we plant one tree,
Mm.
um, and so on and so on. $25 smoothies that are ashwagandha infused, acai bowls that are like fair trade and that are $15 US dollars per bowl, stuff like that. Um, and the idea is that this is all sustainable and this is all
Mhm.
and also social justice was a huge kind of theme there too. You go into a cafe that has fair trade coffee at $6 per cup, um, and they've got like a Malcolm X poster on the wall, and um, there are rainbow crosswalks, um,
Mhm.
in LGBTQ colors. And the fact is that this neighborhood is extremely exclusive, and it was a primarily black neighborhood until it got gentrified in the last 20 years, um, and it has since become kind of the epicenter of this kind of lifestyle environmentalist culture. Then also attracting a lot of tech. You had a Google campus there. You had several big tech companies moving in, setting up headquarters there, then also having these sustainable buildings. It's the home of Erewhon, which is a supermarket that is kind of absurdly expensive and absurdly like lifestyle branding. Yeah, where you can get you know fair trade this, sustainable that, green water bottle. It's just kind of an absurd place to walk into. Um, and yeah, it's kind of like mixing the wellness lifestyle with the sustainable lifestyle,
Hmm.
and it promises an ecological world, but only if you can buy it. You know.
Right. Only if you can afford it.
Let's say maybe that the smoothies are so bright. There's so many types of smoothies and bottled juices that it's like blinding the shades of the colors that they have. They have them in different sizes, like for like a wellness like shot versus like a smoothie. Yeah, it's quite an experience to go there.
Well, yeah, to me that's like classic LA, California, right? The kind of like the glitz, the glam, all the I don't know, just kind of like showing off how you can live so healthy and like I mean it was I always think about California as like the real kind of birthplace of like that kind of resurgence of Buddhism in the U.S. And to me, this all kind of ties into that kind of similar character. I guess this idea to like this conscious effort to like try to do some good, but you're doing it specifically only through, I guess, consumption and uh, different forms of I don't know, aesthetics. It sounds like. I'm kind of curious. So you find there's more of that kind of like lifestyle because you in the book you kind of lay out three different, let's say, tiers or characters, right, of the sustainability class. You talk about one of them being this sort of lifestyle environmentalist, right? This person who's buying these expensive smoothies, who's living minimally, sometimes perhaps just kind of like really flexing that they can afford this certain kind of lifestyle, which absolutely does take a certain kind of like, I guess, just amount of money, right, to start living like that and start like bragging about it. It seems like its own kind of, I guess, flexing. I'm kind of curious about the disparities between LA and Montreal, I guess, in terms of that kind of person, or yeah, just curious.
Well, okay, I think in Montreal, you have a lot of that, but it's maybe takes on a slightly different aesthetic. Here you've got the zero waste grocery store,
Hmm.
um, the bike lanes, the young family with the cargo bike, and they're doing their best to live a sustainable lifestyle. They shop at Rachel Berry,
Hmm.
and maybe eat at like Le Panthère Verte, or like any other kind of green vegan restaurant that prob goes out of business every 3 years. Um, but yeah, it's definitely a bit of a different aesthetic, um, and but I think it's definitely present here.
Hmm.
And uh, you know, it, if you look at neighborhoods like the Plateau, Villeray, Rosemont, um, I think that's kind of where you see a lot of that,
Hmm.
a lot of that demographic. And it's interesting because the Plateau, especially, this is one of the first neighborhoods in Canada that saw gentrification when sociologists were studying this new emerging phenomenon where middle class people were moving back into the urban center.
Hmm.
The Plateau was a key example of that happening. um, and so you have this kind of new phase of gentrification where you see greening linked to uh, linked to gentrification, and a lot of these young families buying up townhouses, and what they want is, they want their bike lanes, and they want
Hmm.
accessible green lifestyle, which is all great. But if it comes at the cost of making a city more inaccessible, raising rents, raising real estate value, and really leading to an evicting a working class from the city, from the neighborhoods that they grew up in,
Hmm.
that leads to massive you know uh, massive impact on what a city is, who a city is for, really.
Hmm.
Yeah, I would add that I think a lot of people, maybe similar to LA, but also unique to Montreal as well, I feel like people don't necessarily, I mean, of course, there are certain people who are, they make it their personal commitment, their project to buy from zero déchet, from the zero waste markets, or from, to make sure that they're only moving around by bike, and like, that they want to have a low footprint lifestyle and things like that. But I think there's also an element of aesthetic that is much more internalized and more like not really like people, everyone has this desire to kind of be light touch to the environment, to care about nature, to be like closer to nature. And so, when there's street art, of like a giant monstera plant, coming out of the wall, that's been painted on. No one is going to look at that and say, oh, well, people who live in these neighborhoods are not going to say like, that, some people might think that that's like not aesthetically pleasing, but somehow it is also, because it's like, oh yes, I connect with this, with this vibe. And you see that in a lot of wallpapering. You see that aesthetic in a lot of bars and restaurants, and
Hmm.
it's not so much that they are, quote, sustainable, in any material sense, but there is this aesthetic in the cafes, in the coffee shops, that that this is like light touch somehow. I'm not like, I biked here. I'm getting like this. I'm getting my lattes with oat milk, and I'm sitting next to this corner, like like wood paneling and like a wood table, and there's plants, potted plants all over the place.
Hmm.
It's more that, I think, that is where that aesthetic plays on to a kind of connection to the environment and a connection to being light touch. So I think
Sure.
some of this stuff is deeply internalized. We don't even pay
Hmm.
attention to that, but it really, yeah, it's in fact really what makes up a lot of the sort of lifestyle environmentalism, and what goes on with that, all the kind of, yeah, the other forms of consumption vibing, let's say, that
Hmm.
go along with that.
Right, right. I always understood as this thing of like someone trying to that it's like someone's ethics and morals just being solely tied to their own kind of like personal choices, right? And like personal dress and where they hang out and who they talk to, right? But I guess what I feel like I'm kind of drawing from this is that outside of there's a world outside of that, right? Of political action and possibility. Um outside of the kind of just pure like aesthetic choices and pure like because I think I always find it I don't want to say endearing, but I always find it kind of like I guess noble. I should say, when someone when someone is successfully able to live these kinds of like, let's say, like waste free life, or kind of like really like keep like like they have the discipline of like a monk, right, about these kinds of things and the kind of consumer choices they're making. But I guess my question then is like, what do you two believe that limits, or what do you think is possible beyond those kinds of choices?
But I think the very first thing that does is, as we point out in the book, is if you focus on lifestyle and focus on the choices that you can make, in shaping your lifestyle, what that automatically does, it's not just that individual things, don't change things on a systematic level. Like maybe they do.
Hmm.
Like we do individually choose to do things that do have an impact. It's that it forgets class. Like it really takes class out of the picture. And that's why we call it the sustainability class. It's a particular group of people who are well educated, who have disposable income usually, and who have, sustainable values. They want to make the world a better place. They care. But then the actions that they end up doing actually reinforce their class position. It doesn't actually affect anything uh, about why we have class inequality in society. So if sustainability becomes about either having as zero impact as possible, or like buying the right kind of car, what that immediately does is it makes it impossible. It links sustainability to those who are able to make those choices, and then sustainability becomes branded as something that is exclusive, and that's the issue here. And you see that kind of dynamic playing out in Montreal, in Canada, where you had the carbon tax being framed, like on a Canadian level. The carbon tax was being framed as a anti-working class. In Toronto, you had this big dispute about bike lanes in the city, where the premier Doug Ford, said like we have to tear out all these bike lanes. People from the suburbs can't, working class people can't commute to work. Um, and in Montreal, we had exactly the same conflict happen, where you had this Projet Montréal mayor of Villeray, Parkex, come in and say Parkex needs more bike lanes, and kind of force through this bike lane expansion in Park Extension. The very same neighborhood that's feeling the effects of this new campus, and seeing a crisis of evictions. You had residents, working class residents, protesting against this bike lane expansion, and it literally became like, if you look at the photos of the CBC articles, it was a brown versus white protest. Uh, Brown or a recent immigrant community saying like, no, we want our parking spaces because we need to get to work far away from the center of city, versus like white, very well meaning, many of my friends, who are really great in many ways on the other side. And it creates this very uncomfortable kind of connection between green and exclusion, that a lot of people start feeling like, oh, that's not for me. Because if it becomes about like what your individual action is doing, it becomes about guilt. Like, your action is based on guilt for being a part of society, and guilt doesn't build very good politics. It doesn't build very good collective action. It's not a good base for that.
Yeah, and on the other side of that guilt nexus, and it really plays out as well in Park X with the bike lanes, this debate that took place, is shame. Where if you don't have a car, for if you're a recent immigrant and you're coming, it's like upwardly mobile. You're moving in this direction. You've come from someplace, and you've come to Canada. You've come to Montreal. There's different levels of pressure, class pressure, that a lot of first generation immigrants feel. I give this example of how like people like the South Asian communities that have moved to the West Island, let's say, they look down upon the South Asian communities that live in Park X, because it's like, oh, you just came from the country, from our country, and you've just landed here. You're in Park X, like ha ha ha, it's like it's like very, it's like negatively looked down upon. So then, like, for a lot of people to have, even from that sort of perspective, there's, yes, getting to work, which is obviously you need to have a car, but there's also having a car as a kind of like sign of upward mobility. Whereas those for other people, that's not the case, where having a car is seen as somehow negative, and you need to have a bike, and you need to have, so it's like two different worlds in a way, that are all like speaking completely across each other based on this lack of understanding of class relations. And it's really like incredible to see that play out, and just there's like very little in the way of so in that sense there is this shame and guilt complex. On the one hand, there's the guilt, like, oh, I should be doing more, I should be in a car, that's like, I should be
Hmm.
using a bike. But then there's also the shame of like, yeah, of like using a bike, when it should be more appropriate to be using a car, now that we've come here, we've come, it's
Hmm.
like this is this social mobility element. So I think like it's much more nuanced and complex than what the
No,
sustainability class, let's say, wants to present it to be.
no, yeah, I think that's absolutely fascinating. I remember following those protests and thinking, oh, this is kind of like, I guess, a serious rupture point, or point of contention, I guess, for this kind of sustainability class, for Projet Montréal supporters, especially with, like, I mean, you had the protests against the bike lanes in Park X, and it was like you're saying, exactly right. You had this crowd of well-meaning, let's say, white people, and then this other crowd of recent immigrants, South Asians, who are against this thing. It's just not a, just the optics aren't great. And then you had the similar thing, I think happening again in like Saint Michel, with like a predominantly North African crowd, also wanting to protect their parking spots. And it's an interesting thing that, like, I mean, it's the same mayor, but it's an interesting thing that's like, I guess, you have these two things clashing. I mean, while we're talking about Projet Montréal, I think this is a good time to ask about the green administrator. So, in your book, you talk about this figure of the sustainability class, the green administrator.
All right,
You
let's
want to
go.
explain? You want to explain who is this green administrator? What shade of green is it?
Yeah, so the green administrator is you've got the lifestyle environmentalists, you've got the green administrators. They're the people working for nonprofits. They're people who are professionals, like it's part of their job. They on the like global level, they're the people flying from conference to conference. The conference of the parties on climate change.
Hmm.
And they're trying to design the right policies, the build the coalitions to get you know to do what's necessary to stop climate change. Um, but what often happens, and you've got the academics also. Um, what often happens is that a lot of these people, again, very well-meaning, but it becomes about the next grant, the next project, getting that next grant money, often working on 1 to 2 year cycles at best, um, kind of always spinning new terms, spinning new concepts, just to get ahead, just to look innovative.
Hmm.
And you've got like sustainable growth, sustainable development, green growth. Now you've got regenerative agriculture. You had organic, and like it's always kind of like coming up with new terms. And on a city level, like what that looks like, you can have, let's say, these big initiatives, participatory budgeting, so that citizens can take part in deciding what kinds of things get built. People can vote on which projects should go ahead. You've got all kind of urbanism, like all these new ways of building the city. Again, it's often people who kind of come from a professional context, and it's their job, and it very often, because they have this like very middle class perspective, background, sensitivity. A lot of these things don't often, they pretend to speak for, but don't at all really speak to the concerns of working class poor people, and in fact often create a sense of division and exclusion. Yeah. I don't know, VJ, do you have any thoughts to add there?
Yeah, I think the green. Well, first of all, I think we both, and perhaps many of us, would fall under this category as well, because I am at Concordia University. Aaron works at a nonprofit, so this kind of, it's like, it's sort of the professionalization of what is essentially like revolutionary transformation that is required to
Hmm.
change, to change the ecological relationships, to transform the ecological relationships by which people relate to each other and the world. Like, when we try to make that into an expert profession, it's not to say that we're not doing the best that we can do. It's not to say that we don't all have our hearts in the right place. It's not to say we see some avenues of hope within that, but we also have to like step back and realize, I think that's what the green administrators sort of framing of the sustainability class as we define it tries to do, is to say like, well, we're also, embedded in this structure where, yeah, where we have to, where we like are, where we are maintaining ourselves, or maintaining our professions, let's say. And so this
Hmm.
professionalization in a way takes away from the movement building, the actual form of organizing and resistance that is needed to constantly put pressure on the system for it to transform, for it to change, by the people, for the people, so that professionalization process is really problematic. And with the environment, I mean, with like as Aaron was mentioning, the sort of climate COP, the circuit that in which, it's really about landing capital in new innovative, which is another idea that we frame, the sort of focus on innovation. How
Hmm.
can we innovate by, how can we be innovative in our ideas? How can we be creative in our ideas so that we can get more of this financing, green financing flowing, without
Hmm.
actually focusing on what is, the end becomes to get that financing flowing, rather than, no, we need to stop emissions right now. We should, not even right now, yesterday. This is like
Hmm.
all hands on deck, absolute urgency situation. This is not, just the cycle of our professions. And so that's kind of what, like, and I think, yeah, with Projet Montreal, it's really, for them, they depend on a tax base, to be able to have revenue, and two, they depend on their base to continuously vote them for the next municipal elections. And so this is also part of the problem. If you're going to have a people's party, let's say, or a party that's supposed to represent the interests of, of everyone, then it has to be, it can't, it's got to be far more, like, it's got to be based on the demands of those movements. And Projet Montreal has, professionalized itself in a way within this
Hmm.
sort of political spectrum to such a degree that it can only really rely on its base rather than the people, and that's potentially a serious problem. It is a very serious problem.
Right,
Well,
right. I mean, just before we were talking about the plateau, right? That's the heartland, is it not, of Projet Montréal? It's kind of like it's. I always find it so interesting, the kind of, I guess, the population demographic change and movement of that neighborhood, and how it's supposedly the heart of, like, I don't know, like progressive municipal politics in North America. But meanwhile, it's a product of gentrification. It's continuing gentrification, if anything, in the kind of like outer reaches of that base.
yeah, if you look at Projet Montréal, like Vijay and I, like we've watched them, kind of form as a party, and then finally take power after, trying a few times. And it's really a coalition between like progressives and middle class, like
Hmm.
green middle class specifically. And if you look at the policies that they've put in place, yes, we have, Montreal it's a much more beautiful city. It has beautiful bike lanes, beautiful green spaces. Um, at the same time, we've seen a cut in funding to public transit. We've seen a doubling of funding to police, also increasing funding to policing public transit itself,
Hmm.
um, and a real failure to deliver on the social housing that was promised. Um, and we have a crisis um, of homelessness in the city where more than ever before, like I think in the last few years, homelessness has doubled in Montreal, which was at a much faster rate than other cities in Canada. Like we actually do have a really a crisis on our hands. Um, and that's where the contradiction happens, where your base is a middle class that wants the green amenities, but also has their real estate. They've bought their townhouse, and they want to hold on to that, and they want to have clean up the city, and they don't actually care that much and about well, they care about social housing, but it's not their priority.
Hmm.
And then you have, and then how that plays out on a provincial level is, Montreal becomes perceived as these elitist, better than you, a kind of green activists who are totally disconnected from the problems in the rest of the province. And you kind of have this failure to really mobilize people for the demand for what we need, which is getting housing out of the market. And it's rather than becoming a unifying um, project of ecology as something that brings people together, it becomes a wedge issue. It becomes elitist, and we've really been seeing that play out in Montreal, and in Quebec.
Absolutely. No, thank you for sharing that. I think we have one last type of well, actually, well, this is the last type, the third type in the book at least. I want to ask about the green modernist. What makes a green modernist? I feel like when I look through these different kind of I guess archetypes, I see there's such clear parallels. I see at least in Montreal, sort of like I guess politics and urban life, especially in like along the main, right? But yeah, tell me a bit about the green modernists, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I think the green modernist really, it's probably the most, I would say, the driver of these three archetypes in a way, because they're the ones with largely, especially with the economic, investment power in a way that drives the discourses that animate, the green administrators, and that create new lifestyle aesthetics. So, so in a nutshell, the green modernists are those who believe that that there are no environmental problems. That we are this infallible species that has this incredible capacity to innovate and adapt and are resilient to every single challenge that we face, and it's through that sort of that technological vision that we can address all of these problems. And in fact, we must only the reason why we see any of these problems at all is because the technology is simply not efficient enough.
Hmm.
It could never possibly be because of the framing of our way of relating of this techno vision in the first place. No way. It is simply because we are not innovative or efficient enough. If only we could be that much more efficient or innovative, then we can address these problems. I think that's the idea. It's really rooted in yeah, looking at new technologies, ranging from carbon capture and storage to green hydrogen to to
AI.
AI machine learning models to be able to to make production more efficient, to make our
Hmm.
daily lives more efficient, and therefore save on energy costs. Even though we'll just put aside the fact that there's a massive amount of energy demand that would be needed to accompany these types of transformations, but the idea is that overall the cost would be more efficient. And yeah, there's this general kind of accelerationist view, this view that we must keep
Hmm.
going the way we're going, and we must do it, faster. We have to think about this very long term vision of humanity that doesn't get it's not concerned by the empathies that we devote to our daily lives, or to the inequalities that we see in the world today. It's about thinking longer term for the future, and what we could be to surpass all of that, so that our species could survive all kinds of other crises, all of these crises. So it's yeah, there's like a fundamental disconnect from the rest of the earth, let's say, but it's still based on well, we care for the earth. We want to
Hmm.
protect. We want to, we if we were so efficient, we would be able to preserve urban development to a much smaller portion of the planet, and then conserve for nature a larger proportion of it. That's a classic kind of green modernist ideology. Yeah, no, I was just gonna finish to say that, like, the reason why I said that it's kind of the central driver is because it is, I mean, it's the reason why we have, why people can work on their laptops in cafes and drink their lattes and seem like it's light touch
Hmm.
lifestyles, because they've shifted the costs of manufacturing and resource extraction outside of the places where consumption takes place as it used to be, because of this green modernist sort of vision. And it's also how enormous amounts of financing can go for projects that fund whole departments and institutions in universities. Like at Concordia right now,
Hmm.
there's this project called Voltage, which is all about electrification and like a green futurism and things like that. So it's like all this money just goes for spinning new more activities within the green administrator field, let's say.
Right, of course.
Yeah, I just wanted to maybe touch on some of the, what Montreal-based viewers might recognize. Some examples is, you have the REM, the rapid transport. That's a typical green modernist kind of proposal, where you say, okay, we're going to have these commuter trains that get people from the suburbs into the city. It's like, oh, on on first level, like on first sight, that's a really great idea. You're getting people out of cars, reducing reliance on cars. But what this has looked like is a model called transit-oriented development, where you basically build these commuter rails to areas that don't have development to start with. Often they're underdeveloped. They're maybe areas prone to flooding. They're industrial areas, and then you build suburbs in these areas. And what that does is it doesn't actually decrease the amount of cars that people use. In fact, what you're doing is you're creating land value for development in kind of suburban and ex-urban areas, and that in the end increases the amount of carbon, like heavily, like rather than actually retrofitting areas in the center of the city, or building dense neighborhoods. What you're doing is you're getting people into these suburbs, making them drive. So just on a pure like carbon footprint level, it doesn't necessarily. It's a more efficient way of you know uh, getting people to commute, but it doesn't, on the whole, reduce the fossil fuel impacts. And then another example is the AI. the massive investment in AI infrastructure in Montreal. You have this so-called AI hub that the new
Hmm.
University of Montreal campus is a part of. Next to that, you have you had this big Microsoft building that now just houses servers, uh, and it's all in this area. And the idea is that okay, you're going to attract investment in artificial intelligence, and you're going to attract uh, workers who work in this, and then you're going to grow the city economy.
Hmm.
Um, but what that often ends up doing is it, you know, on just again on a purely environmental footprint level, it the total carbon emissions increase, even if it seems like it's more efficient when you look at it, you know, on a small scale. But the total increases, but also again you create real estate value. You massively inflate the value of housing in an area,
Hmm.
and make a city more exclusive, and basically kick out working class people from the city,
Hmm.
who then have nowhere to go because you know the suburbs are these new suburbs built for wealthy people. Now you have, you know, international workers who are brought in to to work at these AI hubs in the city center. So yeah, where are people going to go? And um, yeah, so something that we really highlight is that again the green modernist solutions, they forget class.
Hmm.
And so in the book, what we really highlight is that if you want to step out of that dynamic where you're always, you know, entrenching class inequality, you need to look at environmentalism as things like housing,
Hmm.
public transit,
Hmm.
um, uh, you know, accessible food, really strengthening the ability for people to like public procurement of food, um,
Migrant
making
justice.
migrant justice. So these are all environmental issues, but often don't get framed as them.
No, that's really interesting. I think there's something to that. I think you both have, I mean, obviously written about, and the term, even the sustainability class, comes from that Richard Florida term, right? The creative class. And it's interesting because you had Montreal, who was actively worked with Richard Florida to kind of bring in this creative class, right, into the city. And I mean, even like, I mean, I think you said in your in the Time article, right, where it's even he sort of regrets that sort of approach of bringing this specific kind of creative worker, right, where it sounds like now it's like, okay, we don't want the creative workers anymore. We want the, I guess, the sustainable kind of workers, the people who work in this industry, either as green administrators or perhaps green modernists. So I just want to try and map this out, if I want, if I'm getting this correctly. Green modernists, the drivers, they have like this vision of a blue green city, all glass, it's all sustainable. The green administrators may be in charge of enacting, bringing to fruition some little parts of it, and then maybe the lifestyle environmentalists are the ones who inhabit it. Is that sort of a picture of the process?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds pretty accurate. Yeah, bringing them together that way.
I think then you've got the like Wizard of Oz moment where you've got the like the guy behind the curtain, you know, and it's like the
Hmm.
real estate developers and the, you know, the investors, the speculators who are speculating on housing. Like they're the
Hmm.
people who are making boatloads of money
Hmm.
off of this whole thing. You know, they're branding whole neighborhoods as sustainable. They're creating value out of you know green products, and they're the ones who are who are making all the money. Um, but you know, then you've got the lifestyle environmentalists who are, you know, who are kind of the dupes of that. Um,
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering. I mean, you're talking about the kind of the Wizard of Oz moment, right? Who's actually behind the curtain? I'm wondering, are there what other kind of like I guess archetypes did you want to put in the book that you never got the chance to?
It,
Well, it's
yeah, go
interesting.
ahead.
Like, uh, some people, when we gave book when we gave a talk when we gave some book talks over the last few months, have mentioned, well, actually, you should have a fourth category which refers to activists, where, like, where activists themselves fall into some of these categories, and like within who are considered, let's say, activists, you have these various shades of professionalization and like resistance that exist within these spaces, and that their intention, and that we're not actually, again, like, reflecting, having conversations about that openly, as well as the fact that there is a lot of class privilege as well within like activist spaces. So there's a
Hmm.
contradiction in some senses of how activists sometimes present themselves as being, not necessarily, it just not being able to own up to their own class position, having spaces where they can be honest about that, and like, yeah, so that way it doesn't create these sort of false pretenses around subculture and aesthetic of its own. So
Hmm.
that was something that had come up, yeah, as like as another potential archetype that
Right,
we
right.
didn't look into here.
No, that's absolutely fair. I love the point about how activists absolutely share this kind of, I guess, some sense of privilege, right, to be able to devote however much time, resources, energy into their cause, be it uh, be it environmentalism or not.
I also think like this idea of like guilt and shame is really present in a lot of activist communities, where it's like, oh,
Hmm.
you're not doing enough, or you're shamed into, not being able to participate, so you feel bad. You don't have time, so you feel bad about it. And also purity, right? Like where
Hmm.
activism becomes about actually living this like pure, this like perfect activist lifestyle, which is very unattainable for a lot of people. So yeah, I think not, it- I think one of the reasons why we didn't focus on it too much was then we're just having kind of like a bit of an insular discussion, and also maybe
Hmm.
punching down a bit to the people who are really trying to make
Yeah.
things better.
Yeah.
But there is definitely something to be said there. And someone after our book talk came up to us and was like, "Hey, this really resonated with me. I actually felt like environmental justice communities, climate justice organizing, like I always felt very excluded by this kind of space, because I never felt like I could be a part of it. I could, I felt very like, it wasn't for my kind of person, where I came from a working class background. So yeah, I think it definitely is a conversation that needs to be had.
Right. How to make space for other kinds of people outside whatever this kind of activist class or these other classes you're talking about. I guess, and also, of course, relying less on shame and guilt, which is never really not a great foundation, I think, for any kind of movement. Um, I think what I mean, I have my own opinions on the shame, guilt, and of course, I think I also see like in certain progressive spaces this kind of like desire for some kind of like savior, right? This kind of like messiah figure. I think they can come up, and I think that has like I think deeper roots that is probably outside the mandate of this show. But I do want to kind of talk about. I think we talk a lot about these kinds of limitations, right? Of the sustainability class, and the kind of we forget to foreground just class at all in this. And I want to know now, like what are some practices, what are some, I guess, organizations or movements that are beginning to move in the right way, that are beginning to acknowledge these kinds of like I guess, I don't know, like class backgrounds to it? I'm just curious. Like, where do you see who do you see things doing right at all, or what gives you a little bit of hope right now?
Yeah, we well, one group that exists in Montreal, that and elsewhere in Canada and also in the U.S. and in the U.K. and we mention a bit about it in the book, is called Resource Movement.
Hmm.
They are a group of people who, so in Canada it's called Resource Movement, and there's a chapter in Montreal. They're a group of people who are committed. Let's say they sort of operate through what's called praxis. So there's like these spaces where they're very engaged over a long period of time, where you build sort of relationships with people who are committed to discussing their class, to discussing kind of their class privilege, particularly being upfront and honest about their own money stories. You know, how much wealth do they have inherited? Where did that come from? Like, what's the sort of family history that led to the emergence to like having that kind of wealth? And with a desire to, collectively be sort of called in to support everyone, to invest that money not in, not in making it grow, but in investing it in the community so that it is in fact growing, but it's growing for a collective purpose. And so yeah, there's a range of different like campaigns that they have. They have like a regular campaign drive to try and raise support for specific causes, like the groundswell. I think there's the groundswell fund in particular, which is goes to fund a lot of like social movements, progressive social movements that are calling for environmental justice, for migrant justice, for rights of sex workers, things like that, that are very, very centered around people's struggles. And yeah, so, but the point there being that this is like a group that encourages, in a way, people to think about to be upfront about class and not to hide from it, not to run away from it, not to like try and, cover, yeah, to feign, let's say, where you come from, but like to be supported by announcing that, and now it can be used or directed in a different kind of community or collective oriented investment.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one example that exists in Montreal, actually.
Incredible.
Yeah, and I think that's like it's very useful for people who do come from wealth, to actually provide a space for them to talk about these things. Um, Another example I think is in Montreal. You have what I've been really appreciating is this move by certain groups to focus on like these particular campaigns. Like you have Climate Justice Montreal, who has shifted to this campaign or developed this campaign on free, accessible, and free and accessible transit. So really making transit a core climate justice demand. Um, and in that campaign, building a coalition with like public sector workers, um, and very wide coalition around basically recognizing that free transit is a essential part of how we move around, is an essential part of climate justice. Um, and yeah, in our book we give quite a few examples of local community struggles around housing, and how basically struggles that build uh, collective uh, ownership and kind of community around tenant rights in neighborhoods in Los Angeles. Also the epicenter of the sustainability class, but at the same time, really the the ground for a lot of really inspiring housing movement organizing. They're building basically these connections between you know, community solidarity and protecting tenants from speculative landlords who are, you know, evicting tenants left and right. And we also have that kind of emerging now in Montreal, where for a long time Quebec housing movements were very professionalized. You really had a, you know, a a very uh, a specific kind of you know, like, yeah, people working on housing who were employed to work on housing, but there wasn't really a base of people, tenants, who are organizing around housing separate from that. But now you kind of do see that emerging is people autonomously organizing around housing and connecting that to climate justice, connecting that to migrant solidarity and worker
Hmm.
solidarity. Um, and I think that's probably in Canada, that's, I think, going to be where we're going to see a lot of progress going forward. You know, like with the new federal government, they're promising to build what is it, 2 million more homes in 10 years. Whose land is that going to be on?
Right.
um, who is that going to be? Indigenous land? Is that going to be who's going to be working to build those homes? And are those communities, those developments going to look like? Are they going to have transit? Um, so yeah, I think we really need to start connecting environmentalism with these basic issues around, you know, basic life costs,
Hmm.
the cost of living, and because otherwise it's going to keep being seen as being exclusive and elitist.
Right. I think it's a fantastic way to talk about. I think something I think is really interesting is this thing. I mean, first off, the resource movement I find so interesting, right? Because you're taking people who, let's say, are who don't have that class blindness, perhaps that like you come across often, and they have that privilege, right? And I think sometimes something I come across often is people who have privilege but want to shirk away from it because for whatever reason, right? But it's really inspiring to see these people kind of trying to come together and figure out how they can use that privilege for some betterment of society. Um, but what you reminded me of was I think there's a real good point to be made that I want to bring up about housing justice and environmental kind of justice as well. Where my friend Promise Lee in LA, he does like some like tenant organizing right in Chinatown there, and I remember he was telling me specifically about how it was these networks of organizing and solidarity between tenants that were ended up being the kind of main support lines during the massive LA fires back in the winter, right? So I think that's an immediate example there of how these things are connected and how this networks of solidarity can be fruitful with outside of just one singular context, right? Not just existing in one singular context. I mean, I think this is a great place as any. Now that I've been able to remember the point I wanted to make. Thank you both for coming on, talking about the sustainability class, and I guess the ways that there's a lot of class blindness, perhaps in these environmental circles, and just talking about the different ways that we can be aware of it and how we can move forward from it and be in solidarity with other movements. Because it's all connected. Any last words? Anything you want to plug? I hear there's a talk on Thursday.
Yeah, that actually, I was just thinking about that. Like, it would be good to plug that we have our first book launch. I guess like our official book launch of this book, the sustainability class, in Montreal at the Librairie Pulp, which is on Wellington in Verdun. It's on Thursday, this Thursday, May 22nd at 7 p.m. And we'll be joined by the deputy of Verdun, Alejandra Zaga Mendez, who's also a good friend of ours from Quebec Solidaire, who will be speaking with us, I guess, for the talk. So if you are available, if you yeah, it would be great to have you come over and learn more about the book, and we will have copies of the book as well there.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Librairie Pulp this Thursday.
That's right. And on the 31st, we're also doing a talk at the Great Transition Conference with our dear friend Eleanor Finley, who's coming up from the United States to talk about her book on called Practicing Social Ecology. So we're doing a double book event with her. She kind of brings her experience around Kurdish struggles and struggles for community democracy. Um, and yeah, it's going to be a very interesting talk.
Double book launch, double book talk. Exciting, exciting stuff. Well, thank you both very much for the work you're doing and laying out these concepts so clearly, plainly, and being available for this interview. I hope you both have a great day.
Thanks, Calvin.
Thanks so much, Calvin.
Hey there. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the interview. Please follow, subscribe, like for more content. Could not be done without the support of the staff here at CUTV. Anyways, take care.